Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to do my wrap up for the second half of the month of November. Alright guys, so my birthday month has come and gone, and it's a time to see how I did this month. I do break up my wrap-ups by first half of month, second half of month, just so that they don't get too long. So if you're interested in checking out what I read in the first half of November, which wasn't very much, you can go ahead and check that out up above and of course down below as well. If you hear any Christmas music, it's relatively quiet for me, but I just wanted to let you know if you hear something in the background, that's what it is. That being said, I did read a bit more in the second half of the month. We will be talking about 7 books today. I will say one of those was a 33-page novella, but before we get into those reviews, I'm going to go through my basic stats for the entirety of the month real quick. So this month I ended up reading a total of 11 books, which is perfect, I guess, for the 11th month of the year. I also ended up reading 2,394 pages and listening to 29.47 hours of audiobooks. I did have one DNF in this month, which I forgot to mention, so I guess we'll technically be talking about 8 books, I believe, but otherwise I didn't have anything below a 3-star, so that's pretty nice. We had 2 3-star ratings this month, and then we had 5 4-star ratings. We had 3 4.5-star ratings and 1 5-star rating. Jumping right into the first book that I finished, we have Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney, and this was a thriller that took place in an isolated setting, I believe in Scotland, and we have a couple whose marriage is on the rocks, and the wife ends up winning a free trip to this church that was kind of renovated to act as a home that people could stay in. However, the more time the couple spends there, the more they start to realize that her winning this free trip may not have been as random as they initially thought. This was a book that I only gave 3 stars. My feelings for this book kind of went up and down throughout the entire reading experience. Sometimes I was quite enjoying the story and was really intrigued to see where it was going. Other times I found myself incredibly bored by it. And sometimes I felt like I liked the characters as much as you can like characters in a thriller. And other times I just straight up did not enjoy reading from their perspective or reading about their behavior. Obviously, this is a thriller, so the characters aren't supposed to be likable, but I do kind of at least want to enjoy the experience of reading about the unlikable characters, and I just didn't for a lot of this book, especially with the female character, the wife. I don't remember anyone's name, I'm sorry, but I just really struggled to get behind her. She was just someone I really didn't vibe with. The husband I did occasionally like, but other times he didn't do too much for me either. The husband in this book does suffer from a thing called face blindness, which means that he can't recognize anyone's face, including his wife, and I did think that that was an interesting part of the story, though I feel like at the end of the day it didn't really add too much to it, but still it was kind of fun that it was in there, added a little extra something to the story. When it came to the actual plot twists, I feel like the way that the author did it left me kind of stumbling for a few pages, where I was kind of trying to regain my footing and figure out what is happening. So rather than being shocked or impressed by it, I was just confused. So I feel like it wasn't the smoothest of reveals, and so I think that took away some of the impact of the reveal as well, because I was just sitting there wait, what? So I feel like 3 stars was a good rating for this book. It felt very middle of the road. It was entertaining at times to listen to, but otherwise it was another thriller that didn't do too much for me. Next, I finished a physical book, and that is the second book in the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, Broken Kingdoms, and that is just between those little tabs. I don't know if you can really see those with that lighting, but I read the first book back in December of 2022, so I was really glad to finally get to the second book. I will say that it takes place about 10 years after the original story, and so I'm not really gonna give like a synopsis for it because the original story doesn't really tell you anything about the second book, but I also don't want to say too much about the second book to spoil things in the first book. So this is going to be very probably surface level review because I don't want to spoil anything like that. But we are following, I believe her name is Ori, and she is a blind woman, and she is living in the, I guess I'll consider it the capital city, about 10 years after the final events of the first book. And obviously the events of that last book caused a lot of changes. She is someone who can see magic despite her being blind. She can kind of see it as lights. So if, say, a tree had magic within it, she could kind of see the shape of the tree via those lights. There are people throughout the country who have magic and kind of always have had magic, but her powers to some could be considered stronger, even though she is someone who lives a very simple life. She just sells her crafts, she enjoys painting, and she lives, I would say, kind of a life of poverty, but she is looking very much to be self-reliant as a blind woman. It's very important to her to be able to take care of herself and not need other people to take care of her. I thought she was a really fun character to follow. She is someone who I really can't, I was gonna say she has certain relationships with certain people, but that would be spoilery as well. But she has certain relationships with certain interesting people despite her lower status in society, which I think made her for a really interesting perspective to follow throughout this book. She kind of takes in a stranger, and this action kind of spurs a lot of changes in her life as well as in the stranger's life and all the people and the kingdom around her. The story very much revolves around gods because the gods of this land live among the humans. In fact, some of them are prisoners of the humans in power. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I wish I could tell you why. I feel like if you read my Goodreads review, I do explain a little bit more in such a way where if you haven't read the first book, it could be like slightly spoilery. So if you want to check that out, I always have my Goodreads down below. But I really just don't want to say much about this book. N.K. Jemisin's writing style works really well for me. I would consider her work a high fantasy, but I never feel like I'm confused. I always feel like I can slip so easily into her stories and just read them in one fell swoop and just want to stay in them and not be confused or overwhelmed or anything. I think she has a really natural writing style that works really well for my brain. So I mean, I almost want to say, like, if you're looking to get into high fantasy, that N.K. Jemisin might be a good place to start. That being said, I wouldn't say the Broken Earth trilogy because I always hear people saying that it's really confusing. I haven't read it yet, so I am very nervous to get to that. But this series, as well as the Dream Blood duology that I've also read, for the most part, I had a really easy time reading those despite them being high fantasy with relatively interesting, complex world building and magic systems and lots of characters. I just think that she's a very talented writer that if you haven't checked her out, you definitely should. I would also say that if you really enjoy reading about gods and reading about gods among mortals, that this is definitely a series that you would enjoy as well. The reason that this got 5 stars, I will say for the majority of the book, it was a 5-star read. I was like, yeah, this is gonna be 5 stars. I can't believe I waited a year to read this, but the ending is it made me cry. Like, it was such a weird experience because there's a glossary at the end of each book that kind of explains like the different gods and the different areas of the kingdoms and things like that. And so I was expecting another extra 20 pages of the book, not accounting for that glossary. And so when the story ended and I was like, oh yeah, there's a glossary, I was like, oh, the story's over. And then I just like started crying. It was such a weird experience. I was like, huh, oh. And it was just such a, like, one of those bittersweet endings where our character has been through so much and now she's not like in the happiest that she could be, but she seems relatively in a better place, more satisfied, with the potential for things to continue to get better. And your heart is just filled with all this hope for all the wonderful things you want this character to get because she deserves it so much. And it brought a lot of emotions out in me, this ending, and I just was really attached to the character. The author did a wonderful job writing her. So yes, highly recommend this trilogy. I will hopefully not wait another year to finish it. For the third book, I read and finished Heaven Official Blessing Volume 5 by Mo Xiang-Tong Shui, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I have already read Volume 6 since I picked this up, and so I'm like trying to remember what specifically happened in this story. The way that these volumes are broken up is such a continuous flow because I think they just grab a chunk of chapters from the online story and just plop it into a volume. So sometimes it's hard to remember what happened in each volume because something will start in one volume and then the story will just cut off halfway through that event and then it'll like start up again. So I very much have the events of Volume 6 in my head right now, but as the series goes along, I'm continuing to enjoy it more and more. We are following Shilon, who is a prince, or was a prince, of a prosperous nation. However, he had ascended to godhood at the age of 17. After war and plague came to his kingdom, he attempted to help against the advice of the other heavenly officials, and this did not go well at all. And then he unfortunately was thrown out of heaven. This series kind of follows Shilon in his present as well as in his past, so we get to learn a lot about how he got to where he is today, but we also get to see him as he starts to build a relationship with one of the most powerful ghost kings, who is Hao Chen. Hao Chen is considered incredibly dangerous, evil, and all the heavenly officials warn Shilon against being anywhere near him. However, the two of them are definitely starting to develop a bit of a romance between the two of them. Hao Chen is incredibly devoted to Shilon, and as we read more of the series, we get to learn more about why that is and how they may have had a past together. This is a very slow burn romance, but I am having a wonderful time with it. Once again, I can't say too much about it because we are 6 or 5 books into the series, but I will say that this is just a book that makes me laugh a lot. I think that it has a relatively good amount of humor throughout it. It is kind of sometimes a story I feel like it doesn't take itself too seriously, but other times it takes itself very seriously and things can get very dark and depressing very quickly, and I'll just be like, oh, now there's like a little thundercloud over my head because this book made me really sad. But at the same time, I feel like the relationship between Shilong and Hao Chen is just so fun to watch. It's relatively sweet and both of them are trying to act relatively normal around each other, but at the same time you can tell that they really care about each other, and Shilon seems to be realizing how much he cares about Hao Chen, and he's not really sure what to do with these feelings since he is a cultivator and he gains a lot of his spiritual power through purity, which means that he has never had any sort of romantic relationships despite being like 800 years old. So overall, just having a really great time with this series. I think most people who read it really do have a good time. It's one of those series you just go in to have fun. I think there's a decent amount of drama and missions and challenges that our characters come across. And I definitely suggest checking it out. The last book, book 8, just came out in December, so you can easily binge it. Up next, I was able to continue with one of my reread challenges, which is to reread the Warrior series. I will be failing this challenge since this is book 4 in the series, and there's 6 books total, and I have no plans or really time to read the last 2 books in December, so that's too bad, but I have really been enjoying this reread. This one is called Rising Storm. It's by Erin Hunter, and this is a middle grade series that I feel like a lot of people probably around my age, you know, late 20s, early 30s, are probably familiar with. It is a series that follows a group of cats. We are specifically following Firepaw, and he used to be a house cat who ended up leaving that life behind to join a clan. There is a forested area that houses 4 different clans, and they all kind of live together semi-peacefully, but there is obviously also squabbles over territory and leadership and lots of political drama among these cats. Firepaw specifically is part of the Thunder clan, and we just watch him as he learns to become a warrior in this clan and kind of works his way up the ranks and proves himself, because there is some, I would say, a little bit of discrimination against him due to him being a previous house cat and not having been born in the wild. But we see as he makes friends and alliances and enemies all throughout this series. I always say that I love the series for the drama. This series kind of makes me understand why people like reality TV shows. It's like it just seems like every time an issue is resolved and you're like, all right, everything's fine now, we can all just chill, something else happens to build the drama and just cause all of this fighting and all of this paranoia and all of this backstabbing, and I'm like, whoa, okay, these cats are going hard. I did end up giving this book 4 stars. I will say that the first part of this book, maybe like the first half or so, was a little slow. Like I said, I'm here for the drama, but the second half of the book was very intense and was probably a 5-star ending. I am looking forward to continuing this series and seeing where it is going. There was definitely a unpleasant development in this story. We are definitely seeing lots of changes in leadership as well as alliances throughout this story. We also see some of the ways that humans and environmental disasters can impact the animals living there, and obviously increasing stress within the clans, which increases fighting as resources become more limited. So a super fun series. Despite being a middle grade, I feel like it's one of those that has held up really well, and I'm looking forward to hopefully binging the last 2 in January. Up next, I read a book that is actually on my December TBR, but I ended up finishing my November TBR early, so I went ahead and picked this up because I wanted to, and that is Win by Lily Mayne. This is a novella in her Monstrous series. It's technically book 3.5, and it follows the characters in the first book, which is Soul Eater. This series follows different monsters and humans as they fall in love in post-apocalyptic America. About 20 years ago, a rift opened up between the world that we live in and the world that these monsters live in, and a bunch of monsters kind of just tore through that rift. They were like, hey, free real estate, and the humans' response to that was to blow everything up. At this point, we are living in a country that has a lot of wastelands where humans don't really live anymore unless they are raiders, and there's a lot of monsters roaming those wastelands as well. We have large cities that are overpopulated. There's a lot of poverty, a lot of sickness in there, and then we also have the military bases. The military obviously has a lot of power at this point due to them being the only ones that can protect the humans from the monsters. In the first book, we follow Win, the Soul Eater, and Danny, and we just kind of watch their relationship and as they go on a certain mission that I'm not going to talk about in the Wastes, and obviously they end up together because it's a romance. And in this book, Win starts to realize that Danny is not going to live as long as him. Win has been alive for like thousands of years and will probably be alive for another like 8,000 years. And obviously Danny as a human is not going to live 8,000 years. So Win and Danny end up heading through the rift to take part in a ritual that should allow each of them to give half of their lifespan to their partner, meaning Win's life will be cut by about 4,000 years and Danny's life will be increased by 4,000 years, so they'll die around the same time, I guess. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. Win and Danny are my favorite couple. I love watching their interactions. Danny is such an innocent, warm-hearted person. They're so curious. He's relatively young. I think he's maybe like 23 or so. So he has now entered the world of monsters and is just like so curious about everything. And Win is like, I'm really happy that you're really interested in my home planet, but like we need to go do this ritual. So stop poking at that plant. And it was just so much fun watching them and learning more about the monsters world as well. I'm kind of hoping that we get to see more of that throughout the series, because obviously the monsters that have fled to the human world could be considered by the humans to just be these thoughtless monsters. However, when you go into the monsters world, you'll realize that they are actually pretty built up civilized societies, and just had a lot of fun learning more about that. There was a mention of a character called Lore, I think, which I know is the title of one of the books down the series, so maybe in his book we'll get to learn more about the monster realm. But that being said, obviously with these books the smut was 10 out of 10. Lily Mayne knows what she's doing. I had a super great time. It just had me smiling and having my heart turn to goo. So very glad that I was able to get to this and looking forward to continuing with the series. After finishing Rock, Paper, Scissors, I didn't really pick up any more audiobooks. I feel like I've been kind of forcing myself to pick them up and then have not been enjoying them as much. So I really was kind of like, okay, we're just gonna pick up audiobooks when I really want to. Therefore, I'm not forcing myself into like an audiobook slump, because I've done that in the past and I kind of did that this month. But I decided to read Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cotran, and this is the author of The Charm Offensive, which was a book I really enjoyed. This book also takes place around Christmas time, so I was like, you know what, let's get into the Christmas spirit and read from an author that I know I've enjoyed in the past. And this is a sapphic romance between Elle and Jack. And Elle and Jack spent one wonderful Christmas day in, where does she live? Portland? Yeah, in Portland, because there's Powell's Books and I've been to Powell's Books. And they spent this wonderful day together, but then Elle leaves the next morning with the assumption that that was a one-night stand, and she just never really got over Jack. She is on the ace spectrum, so she's a demisexual if you're looking for that representation. It is in here, but she also has very high social anxiety, so she kind of talked herself into thinking that it was all in her head and that Jack didn't feel the same connection that she had felt. However, a year passes and she is still stuck on Jack, and her life is not so good right now. She was let go from the job she moved across the country to work at, and she is facing eviction and working a job she just doesn't love, and she's spending a lot of her free time drawing these comics about that night she spent with Jack to kind of just process all her feelings revolving around it. One day a man whose name starts with A walked in, and he is the owner of the building. In fact, he owns a lot of buildings. His family is pretty well known in this area, and he and Elle end up going out to get drinks, and he states that there is a stipulation in his inheritance that his grandfather put in before he passed away, that he has to get married before he can access his $2 million. And I was like, oh no, rich people problems. He's like, if you pretend to marry me or marry me for real and then we get divorced, I will give you 10%, which is $200,000. And that is not something that a girl who's about to be evicted can say no to. Things get a little complicated because he asked her to spend Christmas with his family, which she's fine with. Unfortunately, she does not have a good relationship with her parents whatsoever. So she goes to their very isolated cabin to spend a few days there, which isn't great for her social anxiety. It gets even more complicated when she realizes that his sister is Jack, the girl that she has been dreaming about since their one night stand. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I had a relatively good time with it. I thought that the audiobook was well done. I thought that the Christmas cozy vibes were really well done as well. I really enjoyed the family that she was staying with, so the family aspect was definitely complicated, but also a lot of it was really warm and sweet. Obviously, there was a little extra drama where it seems that the man that she's pretending to be married to kind of used to sleep with his sister's non-binary friend and still very much has feelings for them. So she keeps talking about how there's like this, what does she call it, like a romance trapezoid going on, and that just added a lot of drama and fun to the story, and in my opinion. Jack and Elle's relationship I thought was really sweet. They worked really hard on communication. Elle is really bad at communicating her feelings, and I think Jack really pushed her out of her comfort zone, and you can very much see how she started to improve in her ability to make her thoughts and concerns known in a less doomsday kind of way. Instead of saying the world's ending, she'll say like, hey, I'm not feeling very confident in the direction that the world is heading. I will say that it was also a very sexy time between the two of them. And because Jack spent most of the book thinking that Elle was actually really marrying her brother, and there was a lot of tension between the two of them that they couldn't act on, and I really enjoyed that. The book also touches a lot on like relationships with your parents, expectations of your parents and families, trying to make it on your own, feeling like a failure, and oftentimes causing yourself to fail because you already have that expectation that you will fail. So I really enjoyed the anxiety representation in here. Jack does have ADHD, so that representation is in there as well. Overall, I think it was a good book to kind of push me a little bit more into the Christmas spirit, as well as just enjoying a sweet and steamy romance. Speaking of Alison Cotran, I ended up reading the Christmas novella. I think it was A Charmed Christmas it was called, and this was just 33 pages. It just talks about our characters that we follow in the Charm Offensive and their Christmas experience, the first Christmas that they spend together, and they have some friends over for a party, and then it also follows them on like Christmas morning as something very special happens between the two of them. It's just 33 pages, so I'm not gonna say any more than that. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars because it was adorable. If you like the Charm Offensive, then obviously you're going to like this. It is free on the author's website, so you can just go to her website and read it there. All right, and as for my DNF, which I realized I did not talk about yet, I DNF the Vampires of El Norte by Isabella Cañas. I was listening to this as an audiobook, and I believe I got 42% through the story before I just decided I wasn't really feeling it. I don't know if it was because I was kind of moving away from those fall vibes and moving more into like Christmassy vibes, and so the story was just not working for me. I also feel like this is, I believe, an adult novel, but it very much gave me YA vibes. And I will say the characters are relatively young. We are following a young woman and a young man who knew each other growing up in Mexico, and one day they are out at night and the young woman ends up getting attacked, and the young man assumes her dead and blames himself, so he runs off, leaving the homestead behind. And many years later, due to the threat of white men coming in and stealing land, he comes back to defend that land and finds that she is very much alive and very much angry at him because she thought that he just up and left for no reason. This book does focus a lot on like actual vampires, as well as the idea of white men coming in and just draining the land and killing the people there. So it sounded like a really interesting topic, but I feel like when it comes to Gothic novels, I don't know if I just have certain expectations of what will be in Gothic novels, and so far they just haven't been met. But I was hoping for very like eerie, paranoid, kind of slow moving and insidious vibes, and I was not getting that. It was giving very YA contemporary romantic drama, and I know that this book is definitely more romance heavy than the Hacienda, which I did read by the author, and I think I only gave that like 3.5 stars, but I definitely enjoyed it more than this book. And so I think just because the book wasn't what I expected it to be, I found myself incredibly bored. The story wasn't invoking any emotions in me other than like annoyance, because I feel like the young woman's behavior was a little bit immature when someone walks up to you and goes, "I thought you were dead," and you're like, alive? I would not yell at that person and like be like, "You're an idiot. Like, how did you think I was dead? Like, I'm standing right here. Like, obviously I'm alive." Like, I feel like, I don't know. I mean, I've never been in this situation where someone thought I was dead for like 5 years or however long it was, but still, I just didn't support her reaction to him being like, "I spent the last few years thinking that someone I cared about was dead." I thought it was it lacked a little bit of sympathy in that, and I feel like he was very much willing to show her sympathy for why she was upset, but she was just not reciprocating that. So didn't vibe with that. Also, I feel like there were actual vampires in the story and they made a few appearances, but they didn't evoke any sort of fear in me, and it was just such a bland experience. So I think that the author's writing just doesn't do anything for me, so I probably won't try her in the past. I will say that, like, I think in October I DNF'd another Gothic novel, Mexican Gothic. So maybe modern Gothic novels just aren't for me. I just have too many expectations of what they will make me feel and what they will give me, and so far they just have failed to do so. All right, guys, so those are all the books that I read in the second half of November. I would love to know what you read this month and what your favorite and least favorite were. I will say that The Broken Kingdoms was my favorite book, and I do believe that Rock, Paper, Scissors is going to be my least favorite of the month that I didn't DNF. Thank you as always for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!